Good day and welcome to Scriptures Unlocked. So far in the series on the book of Genesis, we have looked at three major events. We have looked at the creation, we have looked at the fall of man, we have looked at the flood in the last presentation, and this presentation will complete the first half of the book of Genesis, which will look at Genesis chapters 10 and 11, which outlines the origin of nations and languages. So this presentation is entitled The Origin or the Emergence of Nations and Languages. So Genesis 10 outlines all the people, languages, and nations that descended from Noah's three sons. The scripture tells us this. Now, these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And unto them were sons born when? After the flood. So the events that we are discussing in Genesis chapter 10 and 11 takes place after the flood. And we look at the number of years after the flood that the Tower of Babel actually occurred. Because Genesis chapter 10 outlines the nations or peoples that descended from Noah's three sons. Every single person that were born from Noah's three sons spoke the same language. But when we get to Genesis chapter 11, which explains how the nations actually became divided and how persons started to speak different language, because that's what the Tower of Babel did. God disinherited the nations and he scattered them abroad the face of the earth. And everyone started to speak different languages at the Tower of Babel because of the confusion that God caused, because of the rebellion that took place after the flood. So in Genesis chapter 10, as we read, you'll realize that the peoples were divided in their nations according to their tongues, and tongues here simply means languages, and they were scattered abroad. But when we get to Genesis chapter 11, verse 1, we'll read that the earth was of one language and of one speech. So Genesis 11 is actually an explanation of how the people started to speak different languages and how they were separated in their different nations by their language groups. So there's no contradiction as we read Genesis chapter 10, which speaks about people being divided according to their nations, in their families, and according to their tongues. Now, these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and unto them were sons born after the flood. And then now, the scripture lists the sons of Japheth: Gomer, Magog, Madai, who became the ancestor of the Medes, and Yavan, who became the ancestor of the Greeks, and Tubal, and Meshech, and Tiras. And the sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz, Riphath, Togarmah, who became the ancestor of the Armenians. And the sons of Yavan, Elisha, which was Cyprus, Tarshish, which later became Spain, Kittim, and Dodanim. And notice Genesis 10, verse 5. By these were the isles of the Gentiles, and Gentiles simply mean nations, divided in their lands, everyone after his tongue, or after his language, after their families, in their nations. And the sons of Ham, Cush, and Mizraim, and Put, and Canaan. Cush became Ethiopia. Mizraim is the Hebrew name for the land of Egypt. Put became Libya. And we know the land of Canaan, where the Israelites would later settle. And the sons of Cush, Seba, Avila, Sabta, Rahama, and Sabteka. And the sons of Rahama, Sheba, and Dedan. And Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before Jehovah. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before Jehovah. So Nimrod, his name means rebel. He started the first kingdom after the flood. And notice what we are told here. And this will lead us right into the Tower of Babel in the next chapter. And the beginning of his kingdom, that's Nimrod's kingdom, was Babel, and Alric, and Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. As we get to Genesis chapter 11, we'll encounter again the land of Shinar. So Nimrod was a prominent figure behind the construction of the Tower of Babel, because that was the beginning of his kingdom, Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. Out of the land went forth Ashur and builded Nineveh, and the city Rehoboth, and Calah, and Resen between Nineveh and Calah. The same is a great city. And Mitzrayim begat Ludim, and Anamim, and Lehabim, and Naphtuhim, and Pathrusim, and Casluhim, out of whom came Philistim, who became the ancestor of the Philistines, and Caphtorim, where Crete is today. And Canaan, these are the children of Ham, begat Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth. Heth became the father of the Hittites, and the Jebusite, and the Amorite, and the Girgasite, and the Hivite, and the Archite, and the Sinite, and the Arvadite, and the Zemarite, and the Amathite. And afterward were the families of the Canaanites spread abroad. These are the sons of Ham, after their families, after their tongues, or in other words, after their languages, in their countries and in their nations. So this is how the children of Ham were scattered as a result of the Tower of Babel. So we have looked so far at the descendants of Japheth. We have just looked at the descendants of Ham, and now we are looking at the descendants of Shem. Unto Shem also, the father of all the children of Eber, the brother of Japheth the elder, even to him were children born. The children of Shem, Elam, who became the ancestor of the Persians, Ashur became the ancestor of the Assyrians, and Arphaxad and Lud became the ancestor of the Lydians. And the children of Aram, Aram became the ancestor of Syria, and it is from Aram that we get the language Aramaic, or the Arameans. Children of Aram, Uz, that is where Job came from, and Hul, and Gether, and Mash. And Arphaxad begat Salah, and Salah begat Eber. Eber became the ancestor of the Hebrew, and Abraham was the first Hebrew that the Bible mentions. And unto Eber were born two sons. The name of one was Peleg, and his birth is significant because the scripture tells us, for in his days was the earth divided, which means when he was born, or shortly before he was born, the Tower of Babel, the events of the Tower of Babel occurred. And when he was born, his father, Eber, named him Peleg, which means division, because that is when the nations were divided and were scattered according to their families and according to their tongues. And notice, and his brother's name was Joktan, and Joktan begat Almodad, and Sheleth, and Azarmaveth, and Jerah, and Adoram, and Uzal, and Dikla, and Obal, Abimael, and Sheba, and Ophir, and Havilah, and Jobab. All these are the sons of Joktan. These are the sons of Shem after their families, after their tongues or languages, in their lands, after their nations. So Genesis is the book of beginnings, and Genesis chapter 10 is telling us how the nations came about. It was as a result of the Tower of Babel. The final verse says, these are the families of the sons of Noah after their generations, in their nations, and by these were the nations divided in the earth after the flood. So notice here, the Hebrew word translated as nations is the Hebrew word goy. It simply means nation, Gentiles, or people, and it occurs 558 times in the Hebrew scriptures. So every time you see the word nations, it is speaking about the word Gentiles or people. So having listed the genealogy of Noah's three sons, here is a chart depicting the 70 names that were mentioned a while ago. Japheth, Shem, and Ham. There were 70 people listed in Genesis chapter 10. There were 14 descendants or children of Japheth, 26 descendants of Shem, and 30 descendants of Ham. It is from all these children that descended from Noah's three sons that the earth was repopulated. 70 nations were scattered after the Tower of Babel. So on screen you can see how they were scattered. So here's a key. Noah's sons, Japheth's children, are highlighted in pink. Shem's descendants are highlighted in purple. And Ham's descendants are highlighted in green. So Japheth's descendants were scattered across the European continent and part of Asia. Shem's descendants were scattered around the Middle East area as well as part of Asia, while Ham's descendants were scattered across the continent of Africa. And Egypt and the entire African continent is also referred to as the land of Ham. So these 70 children were scattered across the face of the then known world as a result of the Tower of Babel. And they were scattered according to their families and according to their tongues or languages in their various nations. And here you can see in this rectangle, you are seeing the Canaanites, who are descendants of Ham. And this is the land of Canaan that will feature prominently as we go through the rest of the book of Genesis. So viewers, according to the scriptures, the rebellion at Babel, which resulted in the division of the nations, occurred around the time of the birth of Peleg. And he was so named to mark this important event in human history, because that is what people do. When children are born, they are given a name at birth. So when he was born, because the nations were scattered and divided at the time of his birth, he was given the name Peleg, which means division. And notice again Genesis 10:25. And unto Eber were born 2 sons. The name of one was Peleg, which means division, for in his days was the earth divided. Here's the Hebrew script of his name, Peleg. It occurs 7 times in scripture. It is Strong's H 6389. It simply means division. So the scattering of the people into various nations and languages occurred 1,757 years after creation and just 101 years after the flood. And I'll prove how I came to 1,757 years after creation for the birth of Peleg. Scripture gives us precise years so we can do the computation ourselves. So viewers, Genesis 10 outlines how the nations were scattered. This is precisely why the story of the Tower of Babel was inserted in Genesis chapter 11 between the narrative of the genealogy of Shem, because God is now giving us an explanation as to how the world came to be divided into so many different languages and nations. Notice what we are told in Genesis chapter 11, verse 1. And the whole earth was of one language prior to the Tower of Babel, and of one speech. And it came to pass after the flood, as they journeyed toward the east, says here from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And who did we say built Babel? Nimrod. That was the beginning of his kingdom. And notice what they said to each other. And they said one to another, go to, let us make brick, and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. And they said, let us build us a city. Nothing was wrong with that. And a tower whose top may reach unto heaven. And let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. So, building of a city, nothing was wrong with that. But when they said they wanted to build that tower, what they essentially wanted to do was to replicate what took place in Genesis chapter 6. They wanted to build a tower. In other words, they wanted to build a ziggurat where they could invite the gods to come down so they could worship these gods. And Babel actually means the gate of the gods. Remember, this was taking place 101 years after the flood. And remember, Noah was still alive at this point in time, because Noah was 600 years old when the flood started. And Noah lived 350 years after the flood, and he died at the age of 950. The Tower of Babel took place 101 years after the flood. Stories were being told about what took place prior to the flood, and we know what took place prior to the flood, what precipitated God sending this great judgment upon the antediluvian world. So the people, headed by Nimrod, wanted to build a tower where they would invite the gods to come to earth so they could commit idolatry. And this was a great rebellion against God. It wasn't that they wanted to build a tower that would reach up to heaven, because they were not naive, they were not stupid. They know that no tower could actually be built to actually get to heaven. What they were trying to do was to invite the gods, the sons of God, to come to earth and do similar to what they did prior to the flood. And God saw this as a great rebellion, and God intervened. And as a result, God was now going to come down to see what they were doing. So notice as well that their fear was that they didn't want to be scattered upon the face of the whole earth. And their fears were realized because God did just that. And verse 5 of chapter 11 says, and Jehovah came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. And Jehovah said, behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. And this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. What were they trying to do? To build a tower so they could invite the gods to descend and commit the same atrocities that they did prior to the flood. And God said this, go to, let us go down and there confound their language. Because remember, the earth was of one language and of one speech, that they may not understand one another's speech. So Jehovah scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, which is the map that I showed earlier, and which is what Genesis chapter 10 outlines. And they left off to build the city because they could not understand each other as a result of the confusion caused by the various languages. Therefore, it is the name of it called Babel, which means also confusion, because Jehovah did there confound the language of all the earth. And from thence did Jehovah scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. So this is what the Tower of Babel might have looked like. It's a ziggurat. There were steps made to get to the various levels. So what they wanted to do was to build a tower where they would invite the gods. And this was where the gods would come and dwell, in this chamber. Here you can see the most famous ziggurat in the Western Hemisphere. It is located at Chichén, Itzá, in Mexico. How they constructed this ziggurat is that they had a serpent's head. And when the sun hit the ziggurat at the spring equinox, you would see it forms a shadow here, and the rays of the sun form the body of a serpent. So when the sun rays hit this ziggurat, it illuminates the serpent's head here at the base of the great staircase and forms what appears to be the serpent descending the pyramid. And this ziggurat is actually called the Temple of Kukulkan. That is the feathered serpent god that the Mayans worship. So the ziggurat was a structure that persons built to perform sacrifices to their gods. These people were building this tower, and after they were scattered in their various languages, they went in the various parts of the earth and they tried to replicate the Tower of Babel. And that is why today you can see various ziggurats around the world. When they went to and relocated in various parts of the earth, they tried to do a similar thing. So this picture of Chichén Itzá is also known as one of the 7 wonders of the modern world. And it's a very interesting architecture. It has 365 steps. There are 91 steps on the 4 sides of the ziggurat. And the final step takes us up here, which is the temple structure. So that is what was happening at the Tower of Babel. They wanted to build a ziggurat where they could worship these gods and perform sacrifices to these gods. And that was seen as a great rebellion, and God put a stop to it. So viewers, let's us back up and make a few points here. So right throughout the story of the flood, Shem is always listed first whenever Noah's sons are mentioned, as can be seen below. But Shem was not actually the firstborn son. So as you can see in these 5 verses, every time it speaks about Noah's sons, Shem is always listed first. Genesis 5:32, Noah was 500 years old. He had his first son. And Noah begot Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Genesis 6 verse 10, and Noah begot 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Genesis 7 verse 13, in the selfsame day entered Noah and Shem and Ham and Japheth, the sons of Noah. Genesis 9 verse 18, And the sons of Noah that went forth of the ark were Shem and Ham and Japheth. Genesis 10 verse 1. Now these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So every single time that Noah's sons are listed, Shem is always mentioned first. It is not because he is the firstborn, it is because he will be the focal point, because the scripture is actually tracing the genealogy of the seed of the woman, who is Jesus Christ, and it is concerned only with that particular branch of the family tree that will lead to the birth of Jesus Christ. So Shem was listed first because ever since God made a promise about the seed of the woman in Genesis 3 verse 15, the scripture is only concerned with the branch of the family tree from which Jesus would descend. And that has been a consistent theme throughout all the genealogies until the birth of Jesus is recorded in the book of Matthew and Luke. So according to Genesis 5, Adam had many other sons and daughters. We looked at that when we were looking at Genesis chapter 5. But Genesis 5 was only primarily focused on Seth's lineage, because it is through Seth's lineage that Jesus would descend. So the scripture is only focusing on tracing Seth's lineage because Jesus was a descendant of both Seth and he's also a descendant of Shem, and that is why Shem was given prominence. So every time Noah's sons are mentioned, Shem is listed first, not because he's the firstborn, and I prove that he's not the firstborn. So notice on screen you are seeing Jesus' genealogy. God, who is the creator, he created Adam. Adam had many other sons and daughters. He had Cain, his firstborn, then he had Abel, and then Seth is mentioned. And Seth was born when Adam was 130 years old. The scripture is not concerned with the other branches of Adam's family tree. It is only concerned with Seth, because it is through Seth's lineage that Jesus Christ would descend. Seth had Enosh, Enosh had Canaan, Canaan had Mahalalel, Mahalalel had Jared, Jared had Enoch, Enoch had Methuselah, Methuselah became the father of Lamech, Lamech became the father of Noah, and Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. But we are not interested in Japheth's lineage or Ham's lineage. We are only concerned with Shem's lineage. Shem is the son of Noah, through whom Jesus would descend. And then notice, Shem would have many other sons and daughters, as we'll discuss a little later from now, but we are not concerned with their branch of the family tree. We're only concerned with Arphaxad, because it is through Arphaxad that Jesus would descend. So Shem had Arphaxad, and as you can see on screen, this will take us all the way down to, we mentioned Peleg, all the way to Abraham. And in Abraham, after Genesis chapter 11, will become the focal point. We will then trace Abraham's genealogy. Abraham had Isaac. Isaac had a twin, Jacob and Esau. We are not concerned with Esau because it is through Jacob's lineage that Jesus would descend. Jacob had 12 sons. We are not concerned with the other sons. We are only concerned with Judah. Jesus eventually came from the tribe of Judah. And as you can see, we'll get all the way down to David. David had many sons. We are not concerned with any other sons of David other than Solomon, through whom Jesus would descend, as well as Nathan. Because as you go down Solomon's genealogy, we'll get to a man by the name of Joseph, who was actually the father of Mary, not her husband. So Mary was an actual descendant of Solomon. Joseph, who was Mary's husband, actually descended from David's other son, Nathan. So what this is telling us is that both Mary and Joseph were descendants of David and came from the tribe of Judah. Mary was the mother of Jesus. So what we're seeing here on screen is the scripture tracing Jesus' genealogy from Adam through Seth, through Noah. Shem was the son through whom Jesus would descend. And the scripture will trace Jesus' genealogy through Shem's lineage. And that is why Shem was listed first. Not that he was the first son of Noah, he was given prominence, as you will see that the scripture is consistent in doing this, because the scripture is only concerned with tracing the genealogy of Jesus through the son that actually matters. It is not concerned with any other branches of the family tree. So Japheth was actually Noah's oldest son, and Japheth was born when Noah was 500 years old, while Shem was born when Noah was 502 years old, which means that Ham was Noah's youngest son. How do I know this? The scripture actually gives us the answer to prove this, along with certain clues. Here are two clues that the scripture gives us. Genesis 9:24. This is the story of Noah being drunken and Ham seeing the nakedness of his father. My previous presentation that was uploaded speaks about Ham's sin and the curse of Canaan. And Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his younger son had done unto him. This is in reference to Ham. So here, Ham is referred to as Noah's younger son. Genesis 10:21 says, unto Shem, the brother of Japheth, the elder. Here in Genesis 10 verse 21, Japheth is called Shem's elder brother. But the clearest proof to show that Japheth was actually Noah's oldest son can be seen in Genesis 11 verse 10. The descendants of Shem. We are now going to take up the descendants of Shem, because the story of the Tower of Babel actually interrupted the genealogy of Shem. It says, these are the generations of Shem. Shem was 100 years old and begat Arphaxad 2 years after the flood. So Arphaxad was born 2 years after the flood, when Shem was 100 years old. We know from scripture that Noah was 600 years old when the flood began. Genesis 7 verse 6 says this, and Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters was upon the earth. So Noah was 600 years old when the flood began, and Arphaxad was born 2 years after the flood. So it simply means that Noah was 602 years old when Arphaxad was born. Since Arphaxad was born when Shem was 100 years old, then it's flawless logic to conclude that Shem was born when Noah was 502 years old. So Noah was 602 years old when Arphaxad was born, and the scripture tells us in Genesis 11 verse 10 that Shem was 100 years old. So 100 from 602 gives us 502 years old. So we know that Japheth was born when Noah was 500 years old, and that is why the scripture says Japheth the elder, and Shem was born when Noah was 502 years old. So Japheth is the oldest son of Noah, then Shem was the second born, and Ham was the youngest son of Noah. So viewers, we know from scripture that the flood occurred 1,656 years after creation. And based on the genealogy given in Genesis chapter 11, we can also ascertain the exact year that Peleg was born, as well as the year that God confounded the languages at Babel. Notice Genesis 11 verse 11. And Shem lived after he begat Arphaxad 500 years and begat sons and daughters. So notice, Shem had many more sons and daughters, but we are not concerned with their lineages. All we are concerned with is Arphaxad's lineage, because Arphaxad would be the son through whom Jesus would descend. So just like Adam and Seth, who had many more sons and daughters, Shem also had many sons and daughters. But in tracing Jesus' genealogy, the scripture is only concerned with Arphaxad's lineage, because he is the son through whom the Messiah, Jesus Christ, would descend. Notice as we go through Shem's genealogy, and Arphaxad lived 530 years and begat Salah. And Arphaxad lived after he begat Salah 403 years and begat sons and daughters. Similar thing. We are not concerned with Arphaxad other sons and daughters. We are only concerned with Salah's lineage. And Salah lived 30 years and begat Eber. And Salah lived after he begat Eber 403 years and begat sons and daughters. But again, we are not concerned with their branches of the family tree. We are only concerned with Eber's lineage. And Eber lived 430 years and begat Peleg. And Eber lived after he begat Peleg 430 years and begat sons and daughters. But again, I'm stressing this. We are not concerned with Eber's other sons and daughters. All we are concerned with is Peleg's lineage. So based on these years that are mentioned in Genesis chapter 11, verse 12 to 17, let's now do the math to determine the exact year that Peleg was born. Because according to Genesis 10, verse 25, it was in his days the earth was divided. Let's do some simple calculation. The flood started in the year 1,656 years after creation. Arphaxad was born 2 years after the flood. Arphaxad was 35 years old when Salah was born. Salah was 30 years old when he begot Eber, and Eber was 34 years old when Peleg was born. Therefore, by doing a simple addition of these numbers, 1,656 years, which is the year that the flood started, plus 2, plus 35, plus 30, plus 34, gives us 1,757 years after creation, the year that Peleg was born. So this we know is the year, the exact year that the Tower of Babel took place. Viewers, Noah was born 1,056 years after creation. And remember, he was 600 years old when the flood started. So that is how we know that the flood actually started 1,656 years after creation. Noah lived until he was 950 years old. And that will take us to 2006 years after creation, which is the year that Noah died, which means that Noah was still alive when the events of the Tower of Babel took place, with the origin of the different nations and languages. So let's now continue to trace the genealogy of Shem, which will take us to the end of Genesis chapter 11 with the birth of Abram, the man through whom all the nations of the earth would be blessed, as God would transition from a global perspective of humanity, because he would disinherit the nations at the Tower of Babel, and he will then focus on one particular nation, the nation of Israel. God was going to call one man, Abraham, and through Abraham, God was going to establish a nation through whom he would bring about the promised seed of the woman, the Messiah. So notice, as we continue to track Shem's genealogy, which will take us to the birth of Abram and up to the point when Abram was 75 years old. The scripture is very precise in giving us these years, so we can actually do the calculation for ourselves and actually track the time period from creation up to the time that Abram was born, and when Abram was actually 75 years old when God actually called him. And Peleg lived 30 years and begat Rehu. And Peleg lived after he begat Rehu 209 years and begat sons and daughters. And again, viewers, we are not concerned with Peleg's other sons and daughters. We are only tracing Rehu's lineage because we are tracing Jesus' genealogy. And Rehu lived 230 years and begat Serug. And Rehu lived after he begat Serug 207 years and begat sons and daughters. Not concerned with them, only Serug's lineage. And Serug lived 30 years and begat Nahor. And Serug lived after he begat Nahor 200 years and begat sons and daughters. Not interested in them either. And Nahor lived 9 and 20 years and begat Terah. And Nahor lived after he begat Terah 119 years and begat sons and daughters. We are not interested in Nahor's other sons and daughters. We are only interested in Terah because Terah was the father of Abraham. And Terah lived 70 years and begat Abraham, Nahor, and Haran. Notice this is similar to what is said about Noah's sons. Noah's sons were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And as I showed you earlier, Shem was not the firstborn. Similarly, Abraham was not the firstborn of Terah. And I'll prove that shortly. So again, a similar thing is being done here with Abraham being listed first, even though he was not the first son to be born to Terah. Abraham was simply listed first because of the prominent role that he was going to play in the history of the nation of Israel, since he would be the progenitor of descendants that would produce the Messiah. And I showed you the chart from Adam all the way to Jesus Christ. And we can see that Abraham was the ancestor through whom the nation of Israel would descend. Genesis 11, verse 27 and 28 says this. Now these are the generations of Terah. Terah begot Abraham, Nahor, and Haran. And Haran begot Lot. And Haran died before his father Terah in the land of his nativity in Ur of the Chaldees. And Abram and Nahor took them wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and the father of Iscah. But Sarai was barren, she had no child. And Terah took Abram his son, and Lot the son of Haran his son's son, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, his son's Abram's wife, and they went forth with them from Ur of the Chaldees to go into the land of Canaan. And they came unto Haran and dwelt there. And notice verse 32, the last verse in chapter 11. And the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. But notice we read earlier that Terah was 70 years old, and he begot Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Abram was 75 years old when his father died. And since Terah was 205 years old when he died, then it simply means that Terah was 130 years old when Abraham was born. All we have to do is subtract 75 from 205, and we get 130. So Abraham was born when Terah was 130 years old. So it simply means that Abram was not the first son of Terah. The verses below proves that Abram left Haran after his father died. And he was 75 years old at the time when he relocated to the land of Canaan. Notice what we are told in Genesis 12, verse 4, which I look at as I will then transition to look at four patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph in the second part of the book of Genesis. So Genesis 12, verse 4 tells us this. So Abram departed as Jehovah had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was how old? 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. Remember, he left Haran after his father died, because his father died in Haran. So he was 75 years old when his father died. And if his father was 205 years old when he died, it simply means that Abram was born when Terah was 130 years old. Acts 7, verse 2 to 4 also gives us added information. And this is Stephen giving the nation of Israel a revision of their history. And he said, men, brethren, and fathers, hearken. The God of glory appeared unto our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he dwelt in Haran, and said unto him, get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred, and come into the land which I shall show thee. Then came he out of the land of the Chaldeans, and dwelt in Haran. And from thence, when his father was dead, he removed him into this land wherein you now dwell, which is the land of Canaan. So here on screen, you can see that Abram and his father, their land of nativity was Ur of the Chaldees. They made a journey from Ur to Haran. And this is exactly where Terah died, when Abram was 75 years old. And after his father's death, Abraham then left Haran and came to the land of Canaan. And this is where Abraham would settle. So viewers, based on the precise years given in Genesis chapter 11, we can also compute and calculate with pinpoint accuracy the exact year after creation that Abraham was born. So notice, last time we did the calculation, we came to 1,707 years after creation, which was the year that Peleg was born, and it was the same year that the Tower of Babel occurred. Peleg was 30 years old when he begat Rehu. Rehu was 32 years old when his son Serug was born. Serug was 30 years old when Nahor was born, and Nahor was 29 years old when Terah was born. And Terah was 130 years old when Abraham was born. Therefore, by adding all these years together, the year that the Tower of Babel occurred, which is the starting point of 1,757 years after creation, plus 30, plus 32, plus 30, plus 29, plus 130, we can conclude that Abraham was born 2008 years after creation. And 75 years later, and exactly 326 years after dividing the nation of the Tower of Babel, God decided to call one man by the name of Abram, through whom he would take a nation as his inheritance, because God at the Tower of Babel disinherited the nations and scattered them into 70 different nations. He would then call Abraham at the age of 75 and establish a covenant with Abraham, through whom he would establish a nation, the nation of Israel. And Jesus Christ, the Messiah, would descend from the tribe of Judah, one of the 12 sons of Jacob, who was the grandson of Abraham. So viewers, this concludes the first half of the book of Genesis, which covers a time period of 2083 years from creation to the call of Abram when Abraham was 75 years old. So the scripture actually can trace the time span from God created this earth to when God actually called Abram at the age of 75. And the total number of years that elapsed from creation to when Abram was 75 is a total of 2083 years after creation. So finally, this is a chart that shows Adam's genealogy all the way to Abraham. And here, I've just did the calculation. Abram was born when Terah was 130 years old. He was born in the year 2008 after creation. So everybody here behind this line was able to talk to Noah, because Noah died in the year 2006 after creation. Noah died actually 2 years before Abraham was born. But every single person here, Shem, Arphaxad, Shelah, Eber, Peleg, Rehu, Serug, Nahor, and Terah, had the opportunity, if they wanted to converse with Noah. And they could have shared stories. They could have asked him about events prior to the flood, why God decided to destroy the antediluvian world, how the construction of the ark was. They could have conversed with Noah about any of these events, because Noah lived 350 years after the events of the flood. He died in the year 2006 after creation. And Abram was born 2 years after Noah's death. So viewers, this concludes the first half of the book of Genesis. We have looked at and we have tracked from creation to when Abram was called at the age of 75. It is a time span of 2083 years since creation. The second half of the book of Genesis will take us into the 4 great patriarchs. So far we have looked at creation, the fall of man in Genesis chapter 3, the flood in Genesis chapter 7, 8, and 9, and we looked at, in this presentation, the emergence or the origin of nations and languages as a result of what took place at the Tower of Babel in the year 1757 years after creation. The second half of the book of Genesis will take us from the life of Abram, the life of Isaac, the life of Jacob, and the life of Joseph, when the children of Israel would migrate to the land of Egypt because of the famine. And that is what the second half of the book of Genesis is all about. It is now going to trace the genealogy and the life and times of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. So Genesis chapters 1 to 11 gives us a global look on humanity. God is now going to get very specific by looking at one particular man through whom he would bless all the nations of the earth, and through whom he would reclaim all nations that were scattered at the Tower of Babel. So thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. I hope that this presentation was clear. I hope that you will stay tuned to the second half of the book of Genesis, which will take us from Genesis chapter 12 to Genesis chapter 50, where we look at the family of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph.